Everybody, welcome to this video on empiricism, and we're looking here primarily at some of the problems related to perception. But let's start off by underlining and reminding ourselves what empiricism is, and it's a rival theory to rationalism, and it kind of followed rationalism and became popular with people like John Locke and um, David Hume and people like that. Okay, so the basic claim of empiricism is that we know things only if we can have an experience of that thing, or if that thing can be boiled down to some sensory experience. So everything I know about the world, squirrels are small, cars go fast, my parents got married in England, whatever it may be, are all things which have to be boiled down to a experience. And if you can't boil something down to some experience, then it's not proper, the empiricist will say, to say that we know it. So this does lead to some claims about knowing things which the empiricist is either happy to say we can't know, or is struggling to say how we would know them. So for example, morality, right? So to say that it is wrong to kick people in the face, for example, it's hard to see where that wrongness is. What's the experience of the wrongness? Yeah, you got the experience of being kicked and the experience of pain, but you don't experience the wrongness. And if you remember David Hume, who is an empiricist, talked about the is-ought problem, which is kind of related to this, the idea that there's no experience of wrongness you can have. So we can't say we know wrongness, only that we believe it's wrong, okay? Empiricists also believe that we are born knowing nothing. We are, to use John Locke's famous term, tabula rasa, and everything that we come to know is through experience. And this is a direct contrast to rationalists like Descartes, who make the claim that we are born with some innate ideas. Okay, this is an interesting debate, and you'll touch on it in some of your readings and watchings. But here's a short example. If you think about numbers, for example, right? So the empiricist says that you can only know things through experience, but the question is how do you have an experience of number 3 or 3? Right? If I said to you, go and get a number 3, or describe your experience of 3, you'd probably do one or two things. You'd go and collect 3 objects and show me 3 objects, or you bring back the figure that represents 3. But neither of those things, the 3 objects or the notation of 3, is the concept of 3. And it seems like you can't actually experience the concept of 3. You have to have it already in your brain, so that's what Descartes argues, in order to understand encountering 3 things. So they're the kind of debates that go on between empiricists and rationalists, emerging from the claim that you have no innate ideas, and everything you come to know is based on an experience. Okay? Another important thing to remember, and you get a reading on this, which is quite interesting and a bit strange. The reading is, should we believe the sun will rise tomorrow? Which seems on the face of it a silly question. Of course we should. But empiricists obviously say you can only know what you experience, and you can't experience the future, of course. So they are very keen to show how induction can successfully show what we can know about the future, but this is not without some problems, as David Hume notices. Okay, they're the basic claims of empiricism. One distinction I think is worth noting, because there's some confusion sometimes. So for example, if I said to you, how can an empiricist know what a unicorn is? Some people might say, well, they can't, because you can't experience a unicorn because they don't exist. Or how can an empiricist know what a golden mountain, and this is an example that Locke uses, a golden mountain is? I don't know, you can't experience golden mountain. But the point is, the empiricist argues that there are what we call simple ideas and then complex ideas. The simple ideas are things that we cannot know unless we've had an experience of that thing. So red is a great example. Color, red. Unless you've experienced red, you cannot know what red is. There's no way you can compile what red is from other experiences. Red is a simple idea, a a basic element that you cannot come to know without the experience of it. Okay. Other ones might be size and shape and those kind of things. Okay. So these are some fundamental building blocks. However, we are able to assemble those simple ideas into more complex ideas, and those more complex ideas, as long as they're made up of simple ideas, we need not have directly experienced to understand what they are, right? So the example of a unicorn, you'd have the experience of a horse and a horn put them together, and you have the idea of a unicorn. In this example on the screen here of a tomato, if you've never seen a tomato before, I could say, oh, it's a red, circular, apple-sized fruit, and you'd have a good idea what it will look like, right? Even though you've never experienced it, because you have the basic ideas from experience of red, of size, and that kind of thing, okay? The distinction between complex ideas, excuse me, and simple ideas, okay? Okay. Another thing that's worth noting is that the empiricists makes a distinction between what we might call synthetic and analytical truths, or synthetic and analytical statements. And although the empiricist says, well, you can't know anything about the external world without experience, the empiricist will still concede that you can understand the relationship between concepts just by thinking about them, okay? And these pieces of knowledge that are based on definitions or based on the relationship between concepts are called analytical statements. So an example might be all bachelors are male, right? That is an analytical statement. That is, it's a claim about the truth of the fact that any bachelor you encounter will be male. I have not got to experience every bachelor to know that's true, because the definition of bachelor entails the idea of maleness, right? So this is true, and empiricists will say, well, yes, you've not got to experience every bachelor's nest is true, but it's not that interesting because it doesn't actually tell us anything about the way the world is. It doesn't tell us, for example, if there really are bachelors out there or how many there are. So analytical statements aren't that interesting for empiricists. To understand the world, the empiricist says, the external world, you have to talk about what they call synthetic statements, because synthetic statements tell us about how the world is, and synthetic statements are ones in which you couldn't possibly know unless you had experience of them, okay? So rationalism, the empiricist says, can talk about concepts and ideas like mathematics and, I say, our bachelor's male, those kind of things, but that doesn't tell us anything about how the world is. The only way to understand the way of the world, how the world is, the only way to have knowledge of the world is through empiricism. Okay, so the main problem I want to address in this video is the problem of perception, okay? If, as the empiricist is claiming, we come to know things through our senses, the immediate kind of discussion we need to have is how reliable or how robust or how good are our senses in giving us a true snapshot of the world, okay? What is the relationship between my mental image of the world and the world? Is the world as I perceive it to be? Sounds like a strange question, and it is. Again, it's a philosophical question that most of us spend no time worrying about, but it is kind of interesting. Let's take the example of a red apple. So when you see a red apple, it seems like there are at least three major explanations for what is going on. The first, and the way that most of us would think about this, is when I see a red apple, and I have the idea in my head of a red apple, you know, in my mind's eye, there's the red apple, I've seen it. The reason that's the case is because out there in the external world, there really is an apple that is red. And that apple that is red is causing my idea of a red apple, okay? This kind of approach is called direct realism. And the claim is that our perception is merely a full and accurate and unfiltered, undoctored snapshot of the way the world is. And without me looking at it, the world will be exactly the same as with me looking at it. Okay, my image of the world of an apple is exactly the same as the way the apple is in reality. Okay? as we'll see, that's problematic. Second possibility is that when I see a red apple in my mind's eye, when I have the experience of a red apple, it is certainly caused by there being an object in the real world that is apple shape and feels like an apple. But my image of an apple with color, for example, is not exactly the same as the apple in reality. There's some difference, there's something that my perception is adding to my image of the apple when I perceive it. And my mind's eye image of an apple is different to the apple out there. And we call this indirect realism. And the third alternative, which I don't want you to talk about too much, but I do want you to know it exists, is the claim that when I see an apple, when I have the idea of an apple in my mind, there is no reason to believe there is actually an apple out there. All I have is my perception. Okay, so this is the claim that there's no need to assume there is an external world with objects in it that cause my perception of those objects. All there is my perception of those objects. Okay, the Berkeley stuff on idealism is this, and it's interesting. You know, to be is to be perceived. That's interesting, but it's not something I want you to worry about too much. The thing I want you to distinguish most in this topic here is a discussion of indirect realism. Okay. Okay, so let's start by thinking about direct realism. And there's a video here that I'm not going to play on this video, but I've linked it in Moodle under this video. So you should watch that. And the question I want to think about is, what is this video suggesting is the relationship between my perception of the world and that world? Okay, it's a fun 7-minute video, talking about illusions, but in that discussion, something very interesting that suggests, as you'll see, the world is not how we think, and the world is not how we perceive it to be. Okay, so direct realism is, as I say, the claim that the world is exactly as we perceive it to be. But this is problematic, and there's lots of easy examples to think about this. One would be the fact, as the image suggests, when you put a pencil into a glass of water, you perceive it to be bent, right? But the pencil is not really bent. In reality, it's not bent. It's still obviously straight. So my perception of the bent pencil is not a true reflection of the way the world is. Okay. Another example would be, imagine again a red apple on the table, and my dog is with me, and I look at the red apple and I see a red apple. My dog, who doesn't see color, sees, let's say, a gray apple. So we're both looking at the same object. I see a red object. My dog sees a gray object. It cannot be both those things. It cannot be simultaneously all red and all gray. So the question is, which is it? And of course, the answer is, well, the dog's perception of the apple and my perception of the apple are different to the reality of the apple outside our perceptions. So direct realism seems to be faulty. Okay, and again, the pencil in a jar is the easiest example here. And the claim is what we see is a bent pencil. The pencil is not bent. So we're not seeing the actual pencil, we're seeing some creation of the pencil in our mind's eye, and therefore direct realism is not correct. Okay, so for most accounts of sensory data, most people would say that there is not a direct, simple relationship between what I see, hear, smell, taste, and the real world. Now, of course, this is peculiar and strange, and it's doubly so because we are always trapped behind our senses. We cannot see the world without sensing the world, right? So that's odd. But along came John Locke, and he said, well, let's think about this more carefully. And he distinguished between what he calls primary qualities and secondary qualities. An example of this, which is an easy example, not one he uses, is pain. Okay, so if you're walking along and you tread on a piece of broken glass, you experience pain in your foot. It hurts, right? But it wouldn't follow, I don't think, that anyone would say that that piece of glass has pain in it. That pain is a property of that piece of glass. Most people understand that pain is something that we experience when we interact with that object, but it's not actually part of that object. We wouldn't say that's a painful piece of glass, or glasses, no, the glass doesn't have pain outside of people experiencing or interacting with a broken piece of glass. So the issue is then, is this true for objects more generally? And John Locke says yes. He says primary qualities are the objects of, are the properties of objects which are true regardless of whether we interact with them as sensory beings. So the classic examples would be shape, texture, size, movement, right? All those things are true. They're contained within the object. But in addition, Locke talks about secondary qualities. And secondary qualities are qualities we add to our image of that object through our perception. An example, again, is color. So when I see a red rose, the rose is not actually red outside my perception of that rose. It is, I don't know how tall roses are, 12 inches high, and it is located where it's located, and it is fluttering in the wind a little bit, but it has no color. The color is added by me when I perceive it, okay? Color is an additional thing that I add caused by the physics of the light and that kind of stuff. But the rose itself isn't red, okay? That explains why when my dog sees it, it can see it as gray, and I can see it as red, because in reality, it's not a color, okay? Strange, and Locke will go on to say this seems to be further supported by the idea that if you think about what the rose is made from, it's made from lots of atoms, ultimately, and those atoms aren't red. And no such thing as red atoms. Okay, so where does the redness come from? And the answer is when it comes from our interaction with that object, and we can explain that, as I say, through our understanding of light and our understanding of the eye. But the point for us here is that the real world, the external world, is not how we perceive it to be. And for the empiricist, that is a problem. Okay, so we talked a little bit about here the basic claims of empiricism. We talked a little bit about the problems with direct realism and how Locke modifies that with indirect realism. And that's a good place to pause for this video. Okay.